In winter, the summit of Everest is blanketed by wind moving at over 200 kilometers an hour. The cold drops below -60. For months on end, the mountain sits inside an air current in which a human being simply cannot stay on the slope. For more than 30 years now, no one has climbed Everest in this season. But here is the strange part. There was a time when Winter Everest was being climbed, deliberately, expedition after expedition, and then it stopped. This is an investigation into why. What had to change for an achievement that climbers managed more than 40 years ago to be repeated by no one today? And the answer begins with one winter day. On the 22nd of December, 1993, a group of climbers stands on the summit of Everest. At that moment, none of them know that they are the last people who will manage this in winter. After them, no one will climb the highest mountain on the planet during the winter months. The pause has now lasted more than 32 years. In the entire history of Everest, only 5 expeditions have ever completed a winter ascent. 15 people in total. If you take every single ascent of this summit since 1953, winter climbs account for roughly 0.2%, almost a statistical rounding error. And it is not because the mountain has shut its doors. Every spring, hundreds of people climb to the same summit by the same routes. Queues on the ridge, tent cities at the foot of the wall, an entire established industry with guides and schedules. In spring, Everest is the most visited great mountain on Earth. In winter, the same mountain stands empty. The contrast becomes sharper still if you look at the neighboring peaks. By 2021, all 14 8,000ers on the planet have been climbed in winter. K2, long considered the most impregnable of them, falls last in January of that year. A strange picture emerges. One by one, the giants of the Himalayas and Karakoram let people in during the cold season. Everest does not. This is where the central paradox of the story lies. Winter Everest is not a summit that no one has ever managed to reach. People did reach it, deliberately in the harshest months of the year, and more than once. And then they stopped and have not come back for 3 decades in a row. So, the question is not whether it is possible in principle. The question is different. What had to change for an achievement that people once managed to be repeated by no one today? And to understand that, we have to start not with winter, but with the reason Everest can be climbed at all. Almost everyone who climbs Everest does it in the same narrow window of the year. The main season is spring, and the peak falls at the end of May, roughly between the 15th and the 25th. About 3/4 of all successful ascents in the history of the mountain happen in May. The reason is not temperature. Spring on the summit is not actually warm. It is still bitter cold up there. The reason is the wind. High over the Himalayas, there is a powerful current of air, the jet stream. For most of the year, this current sits directly on top of Everest and holds the summit under a constant hurricane. But once a year, the picture changes. The Indian summer monsoon advances toward the Himalayas, and its warm, humid air pushes the jet stream northward. The current lifts away from the summit, and the wind drops. What opens on the mountain is what climbers call a weather window, a few days of relative calm when wind speed falls below 40 kilometers an hour, and an ascent becomes possible. Such a window usually lasts from 10 to 14 days. There is also a second gap in autumn after the monsoon retreats, but that gap is shorter and colder. On the face of neighboring Lhotse, hard blue ice gets exposed, and today almost no one uses this autumn window. So, the climbing of the highest mountain on the planet rests on a single short lull each year. The mountain is not opened by the strength of the climbers, nor by their equipment. It is opened by a few days when the jet stream moves aside. And to understand Winter Everest, only one question remains. What happens to that jet stream during the cold months? The answer to that question is simple and harsh. In winter, the current does not go anywhere. On the contrary, winter is precisely when it bears down on the mountain at full force. And the reason has nothing to do with the mountain itself. It has to do with what happens to the atmosphere of the entire northern hemisphere during the cold months. In winter, the air over the pole cools much faster than the air over the tropics, and the contrast between them grows sharply. The greater that contrast, the more powerful the jet stream becomes. And this strengthened current presses down on the Himalayan ridge with all its weight. The summit ends up not merely brushed by the edge of the flow, but sitting in its very core, and not for a day, but for many months in a row. What this means in practice is easier to grasp through numbers. A typical winter wind on the summit of Everest runs from 150 to 200 kilometers an hour. At peak moments, the speed reaches 250, even 290. The record was recorded in February of 2004. In such wind, it is practically impossible to stay on the slope. The air temperature, meanwhile, drops to minus 45, minus 60 degrees. In other words, for months in winter, Everest turns into something like a giant wind tunnel. The mountain stands inside a constant current in which climbing is simply not possible. And yet, lulls do happen in winter as well. From time to time, the current briefly lifts, and over the summit a gap of 2 or 3 days opens up. This is the winter weather window. It is real, but it is so rare and so short that taking advantage of it turns out to be nearly impossible. The obvious solution would seem to be this. If short gaps do appear in winter, just come to the mountain and wait for one. The problem is that you cannot wait for it while staying on the mountain. The very act of being high on Everest in winter is a process that slowly drains a human being. Above 8,000 meters lies what climbers call the death zone. There is so little air here that the body stops recovering. It cannot adapt to that altitude. It can only slowly fade. Safe exposure inside the death zone is measured not in days, but in hours, roughly 16 to 20, after which irreversible changes begin. But the problem is not only the summit itself. To climb that high, you have to acclimatize, spending weeks at moderate altitudes, teaching your body to function with less oxygen. The trouble is that acquired acclimatization fades quickly. A long winter wait at the base of the mountain does not accumulate strength. It slowly subtracts it. Every week in the cold and at altitude makes a climber weaker, not stronger, and the margin for error is almost non-existent. A helicopter can reach roughly 7,800 meters, and only in good weather. In winter, that ceiling is even lower. Everything above it, a person passes through alone, with no rescue from above. All of this adds up to one picture. The window opens rarely and unpredictably, and the body can neither wait for it indefinitely nor count on being saved. That is why a winter expedition on Everest is not a patient wait for weather. It is a race. You have to slip through a rare gap while the climber still has strength left. The first people to win that race are the Poles. In 1980, their national expedition does what no one had managed before. It climbs an 8,000er in winter. And the very first of the 8,000ers taken in the winter season turns out to be Everest itself. The expedition is led by André Zawada, a man obsessed with the idea of winter ascents. The team includes 20 Poles and 5 Sherpas. It is important to understand what kind of expedition this is. Commercial mountaineering does not yet exist. The people climbing are not paying clients but a national team, equipped and sent into the mountains by an entire country. The route is the standard one. Through the Khumbu Icefall and the South Col, the same path used in spring. On the 5th of January, the Poles set up base camp. Over the next 10 days, they build 3 higher camps above it, pushing the top one above 7,000 meters and advancing step by step up the icy mountain. Then the fight for the summit begins. On the 11th of February, the climbers reach the South Col for the first time, the final platform before the summit. But hurricane wind tears their tent away, and they cannot go higher. On the 15th of February, another attempt. A 2-man rope team reaches 8,350 meters without supplemental oxygen and is once again turned back by a storm. And here the expedition is pressed by one more circumstance. Their official climbing permit expires on the 15th of February. The Poles manage to extend it by only 2 days. By mid-February, after 2 failed attempts, an entire national expedition has exactly one last chance left. That chance comes on the night of the 16th of February. Snow falls on the mountain, and toward morning, the sky unexpectedly clears. 2 climbers, Leszek Cici and Krzysztof Wielicki, manage to climb up and spend the night on the South Col in order to push for the summit in the morning. It is important to understand. This is not a weather window in the sense the spring climbers know. There is no calm 10-day lull. This is a brief opening in the storm, a few hours of relative quiet in the middle of winter that have to be used in time. On the 17th of February, Cici and Wielicki leave their tent while it is still dark. They climb slowly in deep cold, and only in the second half of the day do they reach the highest point on the planet, 8,848 meters. They spend about 40 minutes on the summit. They leave the Polish and Nepali flags and begin the descent. This ascent falls exactly on the last day to which their permit had been extended. If the gap had not opened precisely then, the expedition would have had to leave with nothing. 2 days later, the whole team makes it safely back down to base camp. By that point, it has spent roughly 45 days on the mountain, and here is what those 45 days mean. Winter Everest, long considered impossible, has been crossed. The poles prove the main point. The highest mountain on the planet can be climbed in the depth of winter, but it is paid for in extreme effort. A single ascent in itself does not yet prove anything. It is easy to write it off as luck, as a rare combination of circumstances, but others follow the poles, and Winter Everest stops being a one-off case. On the 27th of December, 1982, the Japanese climber Yasuo Kato reaches the summit solo. For him, this is already his third Everest. Kato becomes the first person to have stood on the highest mountain on the planet in 3 different seasons. But this same winter also shows the other side. On the descent, Kato and his partner are caught by a storm. The jet stream drops so low that it sweeps one of the camps off the mountain. Neither climber comes back. Winter Everest is still paid for in heavy losses, and yet the ascents do not stop. In December 1983, a Japanese expedition reaches the summit in winter. And on the 22nd of December 1987, a Korean team goes up, and with them, Aang Rita Sherpa. A separate record is tied to Aang Rita Sherpa. He climbs Winter Everest without supplemental oxygen. This is the only such case in the entire history of the mountain. No one else has ever climbed Winter Everest without bottled oxygen, before or since. If you line these ascents up in a row, 1980, 82, 83, 87, what emerges is no longer a chain of accidents, but a pattern. By the end of the 80s, Winter Everest looks like a hard and dangerous achievement, but a clearly repeatable one. That pattern is confirmed for the last time in December of 1993. A Japanese expedition climbs in winter not by the standard route, but by the southwest face, the hardest route on Everest. This route was first climbed in summer, and that expedition took more than a month. The Japanese cover it in winter in about 2 weeks. 3 rope teams reach the summit on the 18th, the 20th, and the 22nd of December. One of the climbers, Ryushi Hoshino, at 26 years of age becomes the youngest person ever to have stood on Winter Everest. And then it all breaks off. After the 22nd of December, 1993, winter ascents of Everest stop. That winter remains the last one. To understand why, you have to look at who was actually carrying out these ascents. All 5 successful winter climbs were large national expeditions, Polish, Japanese, Korean, not paying clients, but teams equipped and sent into the mountains by an entire country. And it is exactly this era that is coming to an end as the 90s begin. There are several reasons, and they layer on top of each other. The generation for whom such ascents were the meaning of their life is slowly leaving the stage. In 1989, on neighboring Lhasa, Jerzy Kukuczka, one of the strongest winter high-altitude climbers of the time, is killed. And for those who are younger, life is already arranged differently. Ordinary jobs, careers, earnings. The willingness to give up 2 winter months to the hardest possible expedition for the sake of a flag on the summit slowly disappears. And the school that once opened Winter Everest quietly recedes into the past. But while one model of climbing is winding down, an entirely different one arrives on the mountain. In 1991 and 1992, the first commercial expeditions appear on Everest. Their logic is simple: pay, and you will be taken to the summit. A pivotal role here belongs to the New Zealander Rob Hall. He is among the first to lead a group of paying clients to the summit of Everest, people who do not organize an expedition themselves, but buy a place in one. An entire industry is born. After that, everything changes very quickly. In the 80s, Nepal issues roughly 1 permit per season. The mountain stays almost closed, the climbing rare and selective. In the 90s, the rules ease, and the flow of people begins to grow. The scale of that growth shows up in the numbers. Across the entire period from 1953 to 1999, just over 1,000 people reached the summit of Everest. Over the next 20 years, from 2000 to 2019, almost 9,000 did. The makeup of the climbers changes too. Where before Everest was the preserve of strong mountaineers almost exclusively, Now people with all kinds of backgrounds arrive. Today, around 90% of the people on the mountain are clients of commercial guides, not independent alpinists. And this whole vast industry runs in a single short slice of the year. Guides, clients, Sherpas, schedules, all of them need a stable weather window, and that window only opens in spring. Today, Everest lives entirely on the spring calendar, and here is the answer to the question of why Everest stands empty in winter. To see it, you have to take a spring ascent apart piece by piece and look at what actually makes it work, and you find that in winter, almost none of it exists. To begin with, in spring the mountain itself is prepared in advance. Through the Khumbu icefall, the most dangerous stretch of the route, a special team of Sherpas works ahead. They lay out the trail and build crossings over the crevasses. Higher up the slope, the entire way to the summit is fixed in advance with ropes, the fixed lines that climbers hold onto. None of this exists in winter. A winter team would have to open the entire route and fix every line from scratch, on their own, in hurricane wind. There are also no working hands in winter. The high-altitude Sherpas on whom the modern Everest depends are hired under contracts only for spring and autumn. And most important of all, there is no weather window. Without one, an expedition has no predictability, no insurance, and no business model, and no operator can promise a client anything at all. And there is a simple commercial truth. In spring, the client is paying for a high chance of standing on the summit. In winter, he would be paying for a near-guaranteed failure, for a climb that would almost certainly end not on the top, but in retreat. No one would pay for that. So, Winter Everest has dropped out of the commercial world entirely. And along with commerce, almost all the people have left the mountain in winter as well. Almost all, but not quite. There are still people on Winter Everest. Only now they are not national teams and not commercial groups, but solitary climbers, people who come to the closed, emptied mountain on their own, at their own risk. The most well-known of them today is the German climber Jost Kobusch. He is trying to climb Winter Everest alone, without supplemental oxygen, and not by the standard route, but by the West Ridge, a long and difficult line that no one has ever climbed in winter at all. Kobusch has been on the mountain in winter 3 times. His highest point is 7,537 meters, and from there, it is still more than a vertical kilometer to the summit. He himself is calm about it. He says he is not going to Everest to put his name on the top, but to find the limit of his own abilities. Kobusch is not alone in his attempts. The Spanish climber Alex Chicon has been on Winter Everest 3 times. His highest point was the South Col, around 7,950 meters, the last camp before the summit. But the final push to the top in winter has never come together for him, and these stories reveal the central gap. There was a time when Winter Everest was being climbed by expeditions of more than 20 people, equipped by an entire country, with reserves of strength, supplies, and people ready to relieve those who were exhausted. Today, against the same mountain in the cold season, one person goes up. Repeating alone what a whole national team once did is almost impossible, and that is why the summit in winter still remains out of reach. Everest is not the only 8,000er that people stopped climbing in winter. The same story plays out on the neighboring Great Peaks, and the closest example is K2, the second highest summit on the planet. For decades, K2 remained unattainable in winter, the same kind of riddle as Everest. People tried to take it in winter again, and each time the mountain threw them back. The ice broke only very recently. On the 16th of January, 2021, 10 Nepali climbers reached the summit of K2 in winter for the first time. The last of the great 8,000ers never climbed in the cold season finally gives way. But for that success, K2 takes a heavy price. In the same winter season, 5 climbers die on the mountain. The Spaniard Sergei Mingote and the Bulgarian Atanas Skaitov fall on the descent. And Muhammad Ali Sadpara, John Snorri, and Juan Pablo Moore disappear high on the mountain, at the bottleneck, on the final push for the summit. None of them return from the climb, and here the story closes. K2 in winter did yield, even if at such a cost. Everest in winter has not been crossed in more than 30 years. It has been shut by 2 forces at once. The first is the atmosphere, the jet stream that holds the summit for months and barely ever opens a window. The second is a vanished era, the era of large national expeditions willing to lay siege to a mountain for months. Those expeditions are gone. The mountain itself has not gone anywhere. Winter comes to it every year, the same winter as decades ago. Only one thing is missing: people for whom Winter Everest would once again be the goal. And the question this story ends on stays open. Will anyone return in winter to the highest summit on the planet?